Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin not with a grand gesture, but with the gentlest of mistakes, like reaching for the wrong suitcase and discovering it was exactly the right one all along. There are invisible threads that connect us all, delicate filaments of fate that weave through crowded airports and quiet coffee shops, through the fumbling of tired hands, reaching for familiar luggage, and the gentle confusion of discovering something that isn't quite yours. Tonight, we follow two souls who have been wandering through the world, each carrying pieces of the other's story without knowing it, like travelers who have been circling the same destination from different directions their entire lives. What if the universe conspires to bring two hearts together through the simplest mistake? What if the thing we think we've lost is actually a gift wrapped in the ordinary paper of everyday confusion? In bustling terminals and quiet moments, strangers pass each other carrying suitcases full of dreams, each one a small world of memories and hopes, and sometimes, just sometimes, those worlds collide in the most beautiful way. We live our lives believing in coincidence, but perhaps what we call accident is really appointment. What we call mix-up is really destiny clearing its throat and politely asking us to pay attention. Two people, two suitcases, one gentle mistake that will change everything, reminding us that the most profound journeys often begin not when we're trying to get somewhere, but when we're simply trying to get home. Tonight, we'll discover how sometimes what we think we've lost is exactly what we needed to find, and how the most extraordinary adventures can begin with the softest whisper of something being not quite right, not quite as we expected, not quite as we planned, but somehow, mysteriously, exactly as it should be. Before we begin this gentle journey together, let's settle into stillness like weary travelers finally finding the perfect seat after a long day. Take a deep breath in, as if you're inhaling the calm of an empty airport terminal at dawn, that peaceful moment when the world feels full of possibility and quiet promise. Feel that breath fill your lungs like morning light filling an empty departure lounge, soft and golden and unhurried. Now breathe out slowly, releasing any tension or hurry from your day, letting it flow away like passengers boarding distant flights, taking their noise and urgency with them until only peace remains. With each breath, you're traveling deeper into relaxation, each exhale a small journey toward stillness, each inhale a gentle arrival in the present moment. Let your shoulders drop like heavy luggage being set down after a long journey, that sweet relief of no longer needing to carry what has grown too heavy. Feel your arms relax like travelers finally stretching out in comfortable seats, and let your hands rest easily, palms open like someone ready to receive whatever gift the journey might bring. Your neck and head can sink back into comfort, like settling into the window seat of a train that's taking you somewhere beautiful, somewhere safe, somewhere you've always wanted to go. Feel your jaw soften, your eyelids growing heavy, like someone watching the landscape blur past, hypnotic and soothing, requiring nothing from you but peaceful observation. You are exactly where you need to be, traveling at your own perfect pace toward rest and dreams. There's no schedule to keep now, no connections to make, no luggage to track. You are a traveler between destinations, floating in that peaceful space where time moves like honey and every breath is a small vacation from effort. Feel yourself drifting like a gentle passenger on the perfect flight, surrounded by soft clouds and softer silence, knowing that you're being carried safely toward the most restorative sleep, the most nurturing dreams. Let yourself float now, weightless and peaceful, ready for the story that will guide you home to rest. Elena Martinez had always been the kind of traveler who made lists, not just packing lists, though she made those too, but lists of gratitude for safe arrivals, lists of small moments that made her smile during layovers, lists of things she noticed about strangers that reminded her that the world was full of quietly beautiful people living quietly beautiful lives. She was returning now from visiting her sister in Portland, carrying the warm exhaustion that comes after a good trip, the kind of tiredness that feels earned and satisfying. The visit had been lovely in the way family visits are when everyone has grown into themselves, when conversations flow like old rivers, finding familiar paths, comfortable and nourishing without trying too hard. Elena worked as a librarian, which suited her perfectly because she understood that stories lived everywhere, not just in books, but in the careful way people chose their words, in the pauses between questions, in the gentle ritual of helping someone find exactly what they were looking for, even when they weren't quite sure what that was. Her vintage leather suitcase rolled beside her with the soft, familiar sound of wheels on polished airport floors. The case had belonged to her grandmother, inherited along with a love of careful packing and the belief that traveling was really just organized dreaming, moving your body through space while your heart and mind wandered through possibility. As she walked toward baggage claim, Elena found herself thinking about something her grandmother used to say, that the most interesting travelers weren't necessarily the ones who went the farthest, but the ones who remained most curious about what they might discover. Elena had always wondered what it would be like to live more spontaneously, like the adventurous travelers she read about in books, people who bought tickets to places they couldn't pronounce and fell in love with cities they'd never planned to visit. The baggage carousel moved with its eternal, hypnotic rhythm, that patient, mechanical meditation that has lulled countless tired travelers into peaceful trances. Suitcases appeared and disappeared like thoughts in a drowsy mind, each one carrying someone's careful choices about what to bring, what to leave behind, what might be needed in another place. Elena watched for her familiar brown leather case, her grandmother's case, with its distinctive worn corner where decades of careful travel had softened the edges into something that felt like a friendly hand. When she saw what looked like her suitcase coming around the bend, she reached for it with the automatic confidence of someone who has performed this small ritual hundreds of times. But as her fingers closed around the handle, something felt different. Not wrong, exactly, just different. Like hearing a familiar song played in a slightly different key. The weight was almost right, but not quite. The balance shifted in a way that made her pause and really look at what she was holding. The case looked like hers, the same warm brown leather, the same brass hardware, even the same small scuff near the lock that she'd always meant to touch up but never had. But the worn corner wasn't quite in the right place, and there was a small patch of newer leather near the handle that her grandmother's case had never had. Elena stood there for a moment in that curious space between recognition and confusion, holding a suitcase that was familiar and foreign at the same time, like meeting someone who reminds you of a dear friend but is clearly someone else entirely. It was the gentlest kind of puzzle, the sort of small mystery that makes you smile at the beautiful complexity of a world where two people can choose such similar cases and end up weaving their stories together through the simple poetry of mix-up and chance. At home, in her quiet apartment, Elena set the mysterious suitcase on her bed and opened it with the careful curiosity of someone discovering a message in a bottle. Inside, a stranger's life was laid out in fabric and memories, each item telling part of a story she didn't know but somehow wanted to understand. The clothes were different from hers, more casual, more paint-stained, carrying the comfortable wear of someone who moved through the world without worrying too much about wrinkles or perfect appearance. There was a well-loved flannel shirt in soft blues and greens, jeans with patches that looked like they'd been added with care rather than necessity, and a wool sweater that looked like it had been chosen for warmth and comfort rather than fashion. But tucked between layers of clothes, it fell open to reveal page after page of drawings that captured moments most people would walk past without seeing. Here was a street musician playing violin while pigeons gathered around his case like an attentive audience. There, an elderly couple sharing ice cream on a park bench, their faces lit with the kind of joy that comes from 70 years of small, perfect moments. The drawings were skillful but not showy, more interested in capturing feeling than demonstrating technique. Each sketch seemed to ask the same gentle question that Elena often found herself wondering about. What beautiful thing is happening right in front of me that I might miss if I don't slow down and really look? A business card fell from between the pages as she turned them, landing on her comforter like a small paper bridge between her world and the stranger's. Marcus Rivera, travel photographer. It read in simple, clean letters, followed by a local phone number that meant this mysterious artist lived somewhere nearby, probably walking the same streets she walked, seeing the same city through completely different eyes. Elena sat there surrounded by evidence of someone who seemed to understand that the most extraordinary sights weren't necessarily the famous ones, but the ones that revealed something true about what it means to be human, to be alive, to be paying attention to the world's quiet gifts. The phone rang twice before a warm voice answered, unhurried and amused, as if Marcus had been expecting something interesting to happen and was pleased to be proven right. When Elena explained about the suitcase mix-up, he laughed, not with embarrassment, but with the delighted recognition of someone who appreciated life's small plots and gentle coincidences. His voice carried the relaxed confidence of someone who trusted that things generally worked out, that mix-ups were really mix-ups and not disasters, that stories like this were gifts rather than problems. He'd been sitting in a cafe near the airport, he told her, sketching while he waited, not worried at all about his missing luggage, because he'd learned that the best travel stories often began with things not going exactly according to plan. One of those perfectly lovely spots that somehow remained perpetually on the list of things she meant to do someday. Marcus's suggestion that they meet there felt like a gentle invitation to step off her usual path, to say yes to something small and new and pleasantly uncertain. After she hung up, Elena found herself thinking about her grandmother, who used to encourage her to say yes to small adventures, to remember that the most interesting chapters of life often began with the simplest decision to try something different. Elena felt something awakening in her chest, a small flutter of possibility that she hadn't felt in longer than she cared to admit. There was something about this gentle accident that felt larger than coincidence, something that whispered that this chance encounter was meant to be more than just an exchange of luggage, more than an amusing story to tell later. It felt like the beginning of something, though what that something might be remained beautifully, mysteriously unclear. Luna's cafe existed in that magical space between Elena's routine and the completely unknown, with warm brick walls covered in local artwork and mismatched tables that invited lingering. It was the kind of place that felt like it had been waiting patiently for her to discover it, ready to become part of her story whenever she was ready to let it. Marcus arrived exactly on time, carrying her familiar suitcase and something else, a small watercolor painting that was still slightly damp around the edges. He'd painted the cafe that morning, he explained, after he'd called to confirm their meeting, capturing the way morning light fell through the front windows and turned ordinary tables and chairs into something that looked almost magical, almost like a stage set for the perfect conversation. They ordered tea that tasted like comfort and possibility, and settled into chairs that seemed designed for the kind of talking that happens when strangers discover they're not really strangers at all, just people whose paths were always meant to cross, who were just waiting for the right gentle push from the universe's sense of timing. Marcus spoke about his travels, but not in the way Elena expected. Instead of boasting about exotic destinations or dramatic adventures, he talked about learning to find moments of quiet beauty wherever he was, about training his eye to see the poetry that lived in ordinary Tuesday afternoons, in the way light moved across a wall, in the expressions that crossed people's faces when they thought no one was watching. Elena found herself sharing stories she rarely told, about finding adventures in books and dreams, about the way she noticed details that other people missed, about her secret belief that libraries were really portals to everywhere else, places where you could travel anywhere without ever leaving your chair. She told him about her grandmother's suitcase, about inherited wanderlust and careful lists, about the way she sometimes felt like she was living in the margins of her own life, always preparing for adventure, but never quite stepping into it. As they talked, Elena realized that Marcus was looking at her the way he looked at subjects for his sketches, with the kind of attention that made her feel seen, not examined, as if he were noticing things about her that she'd forgotten about herself. There was something hanging in the air between them, soft and uncertain and full of possibility, like the moment just before you decide to trust someone with something important. Somewhere between the second cup of tea and Marcus showing her more sketches from his travels, Elena found herself understanding something that had been hiding just beneath the surface of her awareness for months, maybe years. She'd been living like she was waiting for life to begin, for permission to step into the interesting parts of her story, for someone to hand her a script that would tell her when it was safe to want something, to reach for something, to say yes to something that felt bigger than her careful, predictable routine. Marcus, meanwhile, was discovering something equally surprising about Elena. Her careful way of noticing details, evident in how she described his artwork, in the questions she asked about light and shadow and the stories behind his sketches. was its own form of artistry. She saw things that he missed, patterns and connections that his photographer's eye had overlooked, reminding him that there were as many ways to capture beauty as there were people willing to look for it. They exchanged more than luggage that afternoon. They traded perspectives, seeing themselves through kind eyes that belonged to someone who had no investment in their old stories about who they were supposed to be, someone who could see them clearly because they carried no history of disappointment or expectation, only curiosity and the fresh possibility of connection. When Marcus mentioned a place he wanted to show her, a hidden spot in the city she'd lived in for years but never discovered, Elena surprised herself by saying yes before her careful mind could compile a list of reasons why it might not be a good idea. It was a small yes, but it felt enormous. Like the first step in a dance she'd been watching other people perform her entire life. They gathered their belongings. Elena's familiar suitcase, finally back in her possession. Marcus's sketchbook, tucked safely in his backpack, but both of them carrying something new. Some small seed of possibility that had been planted in the space between careful planning and beautiful accident. As they prepared to leave the cafe, Elena felt like she was standing at the edge of something. Not a cliff, but a garden, ready to see what might grow if she stayed curious, stayed open, stayed willing to be surprised by what the world might offer when she stopped trying to control every detail of the story. Marcus led her through streets she walked every day, but took turns she'd never taken, up a narrow staircase she'd never noticed, through a door marked only with a small sign that read garden in letters so faded they might have been whispered rather than painted. Elena felt like Alice following the rabbit, but gently, without urgency, as if they were ascending toward some secret that had been waiting patiently for her to be ready to receive it. The rooftop garden existed in that impossible space between earth and sky, suspended above the city, like a green dream that someone had forgotten to wake up from. Plants grew in carefully tended beds and wild, beautiful chaos, creating a landscape that felt both planned and magical, as if nature and human intention had collaborated on something that belonged neither to the wild world nor the urban one, but to some third place where both could flourish. They sat on a bench, surrounded by growing things, looking out over the city that spread below them like a map of all the lives being lived simultaneously. All the stories unfolding in windows, and on sidewalks, and in other secret gardens that they couldn't see but somehow knew were there. The familiar skyline looked different from this height, softer somehow, more like a painting than a place, more like a dream than the ordinary setting of Elena's ordinary days. The sun was beginning to set, painting the familiar city in colors that Elena had never seen before, turning office buildings into something that looked almost cathedral-like, transforming the streets she knew by heart into rivers of golden light that seemed to flow toward some destination she couldn't name, but suddenly wanted to find. A moment of perfect understanding passed between them, wordless and complete, like recognition without memory, like coming home to a place they'd never been. It hung in the air with the sunset and the scent of growing things, shimmering with all the conversations they might have, all the places they might discover together, all the ways they might learn to see the world through each other's eyes. Neither of them tried to capture it in words, understanding somehow that the most important things resist explanation, preferring to be felt, to be lived, to be allowed to exist in the space between intention and surprise. As the last light faded from the sky, Elena understood something that felt both completely new and utterly familiar, like remembering something she'd always known but had forgotten to pay attention to. Adventure wasn't about going far or collecting stamps in passports, or conquering mountains, or crossing oceans. Adventure was about being present and open, about saying yes to the small invitations that life offered every day, about noticing that magic was always available to anyone willing to look for it in the ordinary moments that made up an ordinary life. They made plans to meet again, tentative and sweet, with no urgency or desperate clinging, just the gentle anticipation of people who had discovered something worth exploring further. There would be other conversations, other shared cups of tea, other moments of seeing familiar places through fresh eyes, but there was no rush, no sense that they needed to capture or define or nail down what was beginning to bloom between them. Elena walked home through streets that looked different now, not because anything had changed, but because she was different, carrying something new in addition to her grandmother's well-traveled suitcase. She felt like she was seeing her neighborhood for the first time, noticing architectural details she'd walked past for years, catching glimpses of other lives through lit windows, feeling connected to the whole beautiful, complicated dance of people trying to figure out how to be human together. Back in her apartment, she unpacked her own belongings with new appreciation for the familiar comfort of her own things, her own space, her own carefully chosen life. But mixed in with the gratitude was something else, a sense of readiness she hadn't felt before, an openness to letting her story grow in directions she couldn't predict or control. She had traveled nowhere and everywhere, discovering that all she needed was already inside her, had always been inside her, waiting for the right moment, the right gentle push, the right beautiful accident to remind her that the most important journey was the one from who she thought she was to who she was brave enough to become. All it required was the willingness to say yes, to trust, to believe that the universe was conspiring not against her, but for her, arranging small miracles disguised as mix-ups, weaving connections that looked like coincidence but felt like coming home. Elena moved through her evening routine with new appreciation for the simple rituals of ending one day and preparing for the next. Unpacking her suitcase felt like folding away one chapter of her story and preparing space for whatever might come. Next, each familiar item returning to its place, carrying a little bit of adventure, a little bit of possibility that hadn't been there when she'd packed it days before. The apartment filled with gentle images of connection and discovery. Teacups cooling in the cafe they'd left behind, paint-stained fingers holding brushes and pencils and dreams. The soft sound of sketchbook pages turning as someone captured moments that might otherwise be lost to time and forgetting. Somewhere across the city, Marcus was probably settling into his own evening routine, maybe looking through his sketches from the day, maybe thinking about light and shadow and the unexpected joy of finding someone who understood why ordinary moments were worth preserving, like luggage on an eternal carousel. We all carry pieces of each other's stories, Elena thought drowsily, waiting for the right moment, the right gentle accident, the right willing hands to lift them up and discover what treasures they contain. We all find what we need when we're ready to receive it, when we're brave enough to reach for something that isn't quite what we expected, but is somehow exactly what we were looking for without knowing we were looking for anything at all. You are safe in your own journey, traveling at your own perfect pace toward rest and dreams and whatever beautiful surprises tomorrow might bring. You are connected to all the right people at all the right times, part of a story so much larger and more wonderful than you can see from where you're sitting. But you don't need to see it all to trust it, to rest in it, to let it carry you gently toward sleep and renewal and the next chapter of your own unfolding adventure. In the last moment before sleep, Elena's drowsy mind held one final image, soft and peaceful and perfectly clear. Two suitcases sitting side by side, no longer lost, no longer mixed up, no longer carrying the confusion of strangers who didn't know they were meant to meet. Just two well-traveled cases that had found their way home, carrying stories of connection and coincidence, of the beautiful way that losing something can lead to finding everything you didn't know you were missing. The city settled into quiet around her, full of people drifting toward their own dreams, their own perfect rest, their own trust that tomorrow would bring whatever it needed to bring, that mix-ups were really gifts, that strangers were really friends they simply hadn't met yet, that the universe was conspiring always and gently toward connection, toward love, toward the moment when everyone finds exactly what they need, exactly when they're ready to receive it. And in that trust, in that perfect stillness, Elena let go of the day and all its beautiful surprises, floating peacefully towards sleep like a traveler who has arrived exactly where she belongs, carrying nothing but gratitude and the sweet certainty that all stories, even the ones that begin with confusion, end with exactly the connection the heart was secretly hoping for all along.